Kill Team has been quietly experimenting with its battlefields for years. We've had close quarter combat environments, open battlefields, as well as experimental battlefields like Beta Decima, which kind of introduced abstract environmental elements. But the point is, when you look at them all side by side, a pattern does appear. If that pattern holds, it'll give us some serious insight into the next kill zone. Before I break it down, though, I want your untainted thoughts, hopes, and opinions on what you are excited about in terms of battlefields for Kill Team. So please let me know what kind of environments, what kind of battlefields you're most excited to play on, and we'll have a little chat about it in the comments below. First of all, we need to talk about kill zones and their evolution throughout the different iterations of the game. At the beginning, there was really just what we would now call an open board. Terrain was flexible, the density of terrain varied a lot because we didn't have pre-made maps with sort of a set amount of terrain on the battlefield. And basically the core rules of the game were expected to do a lot of the heavy lifting in that regard. Then, in Kill Team 2018, something happened. With the release of Kill Team Arena, we got our first close combat board and our first taste of what a more competitively focused map might play like. The tight corridors, pre-made layouts gave us our first taste of a close quarters combat environment, and it very, very quickly became the preferred way to play for more competitively minded players. I like to call these initial layouts that we got the flexible era of Kill Team sort of genesis. They just used the standard rules in the rulebook and allowed players to create any kind of battlefield they wanted out of any terrain that they had to hand. And I do think it was a really interesting era for the game because it allowed you to mix all kinds of different kits and create all kinds of cool, very thematic and interesting battlefields. But again, that flexibility did come with a trade-off. And although I do really miss that flexible era and I do miss dynamically changing boards, obviously player experience would vary a lot depending on how the board was built. Kill Team 2021 came a little bit further down the line, and with that addition of the game, Kill Team leaned much harder into the close quarters concept that was introduced in Kill Team Arena. With the Into the Dark expansion, we were taken inside the bowels of a Space Hulk, but most importantly for the game, these came with dedicated terrain layouts and new rules. Doors, breach points, and rules that stop you from using tiny little sort of nooks and crannies in the walls as cover. These rules for the close quarters environment were taken very well by the community. They added structure, clarity, and really went hard on the sort of flanking element of Kill Team's identity as a spec op game. So after open boards and after CQC boards, then came Beta Decima, possibly one of the biggest missteps, I think, in the experimental cycles of Kill Team's battlefield development. Beta Decima was a kind of an oil rig suspended over toxic oceans, and instead of walls or doors or buildings defining the environment, we were given what the players would lovingly call the swimming pool, which was kind of like an abstract environmental rule which involved the center of the board having, spume and waves breaking line of sight across it. It was clearly trying something new and something weird, but reception in the community was mixed, to say the least. I think the main thing that kind of disjointed it from the wider Kill Team game is its lack of scatter terrain. So in combination, it became a little bit of a disappointing offering. Obviously, the abstract environmental environment with the swimming pool, which was very unintuitive for players to visualize, combined with the lack of scatter terrain that disjointed the game from its usual flanking play patterns, left a lot of players dissatisfied. However, that experiment might tell us exactly where the next kill zone is going. So what was that sort of experiment trying to achieve? Vertical platforms combined with abstract environmental factors. If we extrapolate these ideas and maybe try to apply them a little bit more successfully to other types of battlefields, we get a big clue about where we might be headed. So let's review the pattern that we've seen emerging since Kill Team 2018 dropped. Open battlefields, first introduced in Kill Team 2018, then sort of continued on in Kill Team 2021 with the Octarius sector terrain, and then into Kill Team 2024 with the Volcus terrain. Then we got CQC environments, obviously first introduced in Kill Team 2021 with Into the Dark and Space Hulk environments. Then again, recently reintroduced into the game in Kill Team 2024 with Tomb World. And then finally, we kind of had that environmental hazard environment that was introduced in the tail end of Kill Team 2021 with Beta Decima. The point is, each new season has pushed these ideas a little bit further. This all kind of raises the question, what kind of battlefields haven't we seen yet? If the devs continue to iterate on what came previously, we might not just get like a new battlefield to play on, we might get different rules in the same vein as Beta Decima, but hopefully executed a little bit more successfully. So personally, I think the Beta Decima rule set is ripe to evolve into a rule set that can be applied to jungle terrain. Not just jungle terrain though, I think that Games Workshop will, as they have already done with Tomb World and the Pariah Nexus, iterate upon what came before. And they'll probably take their Eldritch Ruin set, which is a kind of Death World Forest first foray that was dropped many, many moons ago. It kind of introduced weird, like Triffid style, mean-ass death plants with Eldar ruins. This would obviously be a very nice way for Games Workshop to make their jungle terrain IP specific and not just be, generic space jungle. So again, I think the most likely candidate for Beta Decima's swimming pool kind of abstract concept would be perfect and more easily understood if they were applied to stands of trees or foliage within the kill zone. You've got to imagine, like, instead of having one giant brick of water in the middle of the board, a canopy or tree line would be present, and if your line of sight crosses that, then those special bespoke rules would come into play. Also, being able to move through that terrain with a penalty and things like that could create all kinds of really interesting and dynamic interactions on the board. And if we also just take a quick look online at some of the STLs, some of the fan-made bespoke Eldar jungle terrain that's already floating out there, we can see how easily and how well the Eldar aesthetic would apply to the kind of gantries and platforms that are present in Beta Decima as well. It would be really interesting to see the vantage points that you're fighting over to to try and break sight lines through the jungle be Eldar spires, Eldar gantries, and Eldar terrain in general. More importantly for Games Workshop, it would create a sort of a legally distinct space jungle. Again, I just think that this makes the most sense in terms of the evolution of Beta Decima's rules, and it would also give us a very good juxtaposition to the very heavy, very dense terrain that is present in Volcus, and obviously all the heavy walls within the Tomb World CQC environment too. Obviously, that's not the only idea that you can come up with based on Beta Decima's previous play patterns. It could also be perfect for highly vertical play environments. Think a little bit more like Necromunda, Hive City environments with multiple levels, maybe slightly smaller levels as well, so it's easier to climb between those levels, with pre-placed ladders and hatches and access points throughout the map to create a little bit more dynamism in the climbing rules too. Certainly, I do think the only thing that Beta Decima got right was the platforming element of the gameplay, and I would like to see that sort of evolve possibly into a more vertical play environment. Another environment that I'd like to see would be a trench battlefield. Now, with the Krieg line fully realised, it would be a perfect opportunity to create a little bit of continuity between the lines being released and the terrain being released in wider 40k. Rules for maybe blind firing over the top of the trench, possibly suppression or pinning mechanics as well, something like that. I'm really interested to see whether the devs are going to continue down this sort of abstract environmental route in terms of kill zones. And I'm also really interested to see aesthetically what theme that they go with. in that regard. Obviously, I probably would never have predicted that we'd get a fully Xenos Necron Tomb World in a CQC environment. But now that we've had that, I can definitely see the Eldar jungle terrain coming to fruition, or maybe even, other more specifically aligned faction terrain as well. If you got any value out of this little breakdown and you want to help my little channel grow, please hit the subscribe button. See you next time.